Hello and welcome everybody on our Better Together at English series. Now, I had a student recently that I teach asking me about accents. So I thought today I'd cover basics of what accents really are, do, and just some things to understand about accents that you might not necessarily know if you're not from the country that you're trying to worry about an accent when you learn this, language. Okay? So, there are as many accents as there are regions in a country, right? There's as many accents as there are, honestly, there are as many accents as there are towns in a country, because every community has their things that they say either differently or that they say, that they say one word instead of another. So, like, a huge thing that you'll hear in some of the Midwest is it pop or is it soda? Or is it soda pop? And, some people will say soda, some people will say it's pop because, you pop the can. Or some people will say it's soda because, it's carbonated like every other soda beverage out there. Some people will say soda pop because that's an old term for it, right? But everybody has their own things that they say uniquely. You got Canadian accents and Midwestern accents, and all of these are native English accents. So these are, accents for people that born and raised in an English speaking country. So all these are on this side over here. These are native English accents, right? And on this side, there are different accents depending on where you're from and what language you're native to. You'll have an accent based on the language that your native tongue is. So I've got some examples written up here: French, German, Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, etc. Right? Every one of those is going to have a slightly different accent than a different, a Korean is going to have a slightly different accent than a Japanese person, and a Japanese person is going to have a slightly different accent to a Chinese person. And, unless you're familiar with their accents and you're around people with those accents a lot, you're not going to know the difference between them, right? But it's very, very super simple, really, if you think about it. Accents are more specific to people. But most often when it comes to native English accents, right? So these accents, most often what they are going to affect is going to be adding extra words, or how you say your vowels. So A, E, I, O, and U, you're going to say these like slightly differently. So for an example, like one of the best examples that people use for an accent all the time is, can you grab my car keys? Right? So you hear that accent and you immediately get a picture in your head of what, kind of person you're talking to, and you get a rough estimate as to where they're from, especially if you're familiar with that, kind of a New England or Boston kind of accent. So Boston, you're going to hear a Boston accent, right? But you get, let's say, a Midwesterners, well, one of the more famous Midwestern accents is going to be like, Minnesota, eh? Are you from Minnesota? Oh, them Vikings, eh? And Midwestern oftentimes, that Minnesota accent, they're going to make fun of it because it sounds, to what many people would think, it sounds a lot like a Canadian accent, And so that Minnesotan accent is very similar in what most people would associate with like a Canadian accent. But once again, really, when it comes down to it, the most important thing about accents, for native English accents, when you're trying to learn it as a non-native English speaker, let's say. So you're coming from, you're coming from Spain, or you're coming from Guatemala, or you're coming from Germany, or you're coming from Latvia, or you're Japanese and wanting to visit the United States, right? The most important thing about the accents is trying to figure out and trying to get used to the accents for the places that you're trying to go. So, if you're trying to see let's say you're trying to see someone here in the Midwest, you'll want to get used to my accent. You're going to somewhere, in New England, well, you might have to get used to a Boston accent, right? You want to get used to someone in the South, then you're gonna have to get used to that Southern drawl, right? You gotta just know where you're going, and try and find videos or try and listen to things that you can find on those accents. Listen to people talking in those accents. So if you're planning a trip to Louisiana, look up Cajun, right? Look up Cajun and look up Cajun accents. There's probably plenty of good YouTube videos that are going to give you a hint on Cajun accents that will help you get used to hearing the differences between what English you're being taught in school versus what English they speak. They also have, unique words that they'll have that are unique, like I said, unique to them. It happens a lot in Spanish too. When you have Spanish, you'll have words will entirely change meaning depending on what country you're speaking Spanish in. Okay? And obviously there are accents in other languages too. So English is not the only language where you're going to have accents. It just so happens that accents can make English very difficult. Very difficult. English is already a very difficult language to learn due to many intricacies anyway, and a lot of things that make it difficult. So accents just don't make it any easier. But so Australian, Irish, English, Scottish, Welsh, New York, New England, New Zealand, Southern, Deep Southern, Western, Cajun, Midwestern, Canadian. There's so many different accents, and there's different things, different accents to people that live in different parts of the same state in the United States. So somebody from Southern Ohio is going to talk with Southern-ish West Virginia drawl, whereas somebody from Northern Ohio is going to sound more like somebody from Southern Michigan, and somebody from Northern Michigan might sound like somebody from Wisconsin or Minnesota. So you just don't know if you don't know somebody there, try to look up somebody from that area that can kind of give you some acclimation towards the accent, right? And if you're just on a huge nationwide tour, just enunciate your words as clearly as possible. And if you're ever confused about something, just ask them, hey, is this what you meant? And usually if you enunciate your words properly, they will understand what you're trying to say. Most English speaking natives can understand many words in other accents depending on how thick the accent is. Like English has a Cockney accent that's very famous, very, very difficult to understand. If you don't understand Cockney anyway, it is a very difficult difficult dialect of English to understand. So you'll have to get used to certain things that are unique about the language. But like I said, just try to find something on it, right? Australian and New Zealand, there are a lot of people that can't hear the difference between Australian and New Zealand accents. And there are definitely heavier accents and lighter accents in Australia and New Zealand. There are heavier and lighter accents in the Midwest. Like I said, the Midwest, you can have a Minnesota accent versus a Michigan or Wisconsin or an Ohio or an Indiana or an Illinois. Everybody's got a different accent. So really, it's just a matter of get used to the accent of the area that you're going to go to and do your research, basically. It's kind of annoying to have to say that when it comes to trying to teach you English, but when it comes to accents, the only real thing I can help you with is either doing a cartoonish accent, because I can do voices and accents and stuff like that if you guys really want to hear them. And maybe I can make some shorts and stuff like that, videos for you guys to be entertained by. But at the end of the day, my attempts at those accents aren't going to be accurate representations of their accents. Like even the Boston car keys example, right? Like, hey, can you pass me my car keys? It's not an accurate Boston accent, right? It's just a caricature of one. It's just a mimicry of one that's meant to exaggerate it, or at least focus on a specific, like, a specific detail of that accent, right? So there are as many accents as there are places in the world. And every country that, you know, you find somebody that learned English in that country, they're going to have a different accent based on their native language, right? So in Japanese, they have trouble with the letter L a lot and R a lot. So R they'll pronounce with kind of an L sound, but L they don't like to, L's difficult for them too. And also in Japanese, because their language is often written with hiragana or katakana, and kanji some of it, but hiragana makes up the majority of their language usage. Well, if you know anything about hiragana, you know that most hiragana are a combination of a consonant plus a vowel. So you've got very few of hiragana and or katakana are just consonants. Most of them are a consonant paired with a vowel. And they also make unique sounds to what you might experience in English, right? So in English, you'll see like an F or an H are totally separate, right? Totally separate. But in Japanese, there was a swordsmith that I saw one time while I was over there. And the swordsmith that I looked up, I got a business card or something, or maybe I got a recommendation from someone. I can't remember exactly. But the swordsmith was called Osafune, which is kind of like a very breathy F, which the best way to imagine that is an H combined with an F. Because you say Osafune, Osafune, but at the same time you're saying Osafune, and so you just say Osafune, Osafune, right? And so that's a swordsmith that I remember encountering information about at one point when I was in Japan. And yeah, once again, you just have to understand the differences. Like TS, right? That's usually going to be like the end of a word in English is going to be like cuts or beats or something like that. Whereas in Japanese, it's TSU is its own hiragana, right? So you have tsu. That's a sound that we're not accustomed to making in English. So I have an accent when I try to speak Japanese. I have an accent. I know I do. I try to speak it and, you know, speak it the way that I hear it when I hear maybe my Japanese friends talking in Japanese, or when I hear things on TV and movies and stuff like that in Japanese. I try to copy what I hear so that I get a more accurate pronunciation, but no matter what, my native language is not compatible really with learning Japanese, so I have difficulty with that. But I try. I'm still trying. I'm actually working on studying Japanese myself, and hopefully I can get a little bit more work on that going soon. And hopefully we can get the live Q&A going. I will maybe start those on YouTube and then move those on to Patreon. But once again, we've kind of covered accents, mostly that they either add extra words to what they're saying, or they change how you say the vowels, right? That's the majority of what accents change. There are some differences, like dropping R's or dropping, you know, like Southern accents will often drop the I in like words like boil and royal, like boil and soil and stuff like that, oil. So if you say you boiled something in oil, then it's boiled in oil, right? Things like that. So accents are just, they're all over the place. The only thing I could really recommend to you guys is just find out where you're going. If you're trying to visit a native English speaking country and you're not a native English speaker, if you are fluent in English but you just don't know what to expect, do your research on the area and look up like native language speakers to listen to. Then when you get an ear for it, you will eventually start to understand better. I know the first time I heard a true, real, not movie Scottish accent, I had to ask the guy to, I felt so bad because I had to ask the guy to repeat himself every like 2 minutes in our conversation. I really felt like I was a burden in the conversation, but yeah. So like I said, just do your research on the accents that you want to emulate or want to learn because you're maybe going to an area that you're going to be experiencing an accent, and get accustomed to it so that when you do hear it in person, you can at least pick up bits and pieces and maybe work the rest out. So like I said, if you guys want me to do some of those accents and stuff like that, like I don't mind doing the voices and the accents, but I can just tell you that my accents and my voices are not 100% accurate to what you might experience given wherever you go. So once again, this has been Shinrai Sensei, and thank you guys for another episode, sticking with me, and we're learning a little bit and getting better together. So I hope to see you guys next week.